Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to begin day 1 of Unit 6.3, Indigenous Responses to State Expansion. The learning objective is explain how and why internal and external factors have influenced the process of state building from 1750 to 1900, with a specific look on the internal. All right, so we have a lot of illustrative examples that are provided to us by the College Board, and we're going to kind of quickly touch upon these, but most of these are being explored by you students individually through your projects, okay? So today we're really kind of focusing in on these kind of anti-imperialist resistance through direct resistance, creation of new states, that kind of stuff, and as well as briefly touching upon the rule, how imperial rule led to some resistance movements that are going to be influenced by religious ideas. Right, so we'll look at a couple of those. Here's a quick map that kind of looks at some of these around the globe. Some of these resistance movement to imperialism, some are nationalist based, and that we've already kind of looked at. Jose Rizal in the Philippines, the Maoris. We've looked at Túpac Amaru already. All right. So there's a number of these we've already kind of touched on, and there's a bunch of new ones that we're introducing here. All right. So once again, looking at imperialism. So once the map of Africa specifically looks like this, what is the indigenous response to that? So I threw together a couple of different categories of analysis that you could potentially use if you ever come across, this topic as an LEQ prompt or a DBQ prompt. So if you're looking at ways in which indigenous populations responded to European imperialism, here are 3 easy categories of analysis you could use, and you can kind of sort your examples out from that. So 1, some Africans created new states in resistance to European imperialism, and you could use the Sokoto Caliphate in West Africa. It's like northwest Nigeria, modern day, kind of give you an idea of geographically where it is located. Or you could also use the Zulu kingdom in South Africa, the northern part of South Africa as well. All right. Some Africans led rebellions and direct resistance to European imperialism. All right, so direct resistance, is a very common form of indigenous response to European imperialism. So, in most of the African examples of resistance movements that you have as project options are going to fall into this category. All right, so this is a very commonly applied category of analysis. A third one here, some Africans initiated religious movements in an attempt to resist European imperialism. So we're going to see this in Africa through the Xhosa cattle killing movement in the 1850s. You're also going to see this in the United States with the Cherokee ghost dance, or just the ghost dance in general. It doesn't have to be Cherokee. You could also apply this concept to the Taiping Rebellion. All right, so as a religious movement, all right, which we'll get into that later. All right, if you want to look at maybe a 4th category of analysis you could use, but instead of as like a resistance movement to European imperialism, but a way in which an African state resisted imperialism, you could use a category of analysis such as the government initiated modernization of their military, right? That would be a good category of analysis on that one. So I'll repeat that for you. The government initiated modernization of their military. And you could use this for Abyssinia or Ethiopia, whichever label you want to apply to this. All right, so as far as Ethiopia, right, the story behind the government initiated modernization of their military really comes back to Emperor Menelik II. And so Menelik II is going to undertake a modernization of their military program in the early 1890s. When this takes place, and by the time we get to the mid 1890s, you're going to see a treaty dispute used as the justification for an Italian attempt to colonialize Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And by this point, Menelik's military will have accumulated enough modern military technology to be able to have a military parity with the Italians. So outnumbered in with equal military technology, you're going to see Ethiopia being able to defend themselves. This is a very well-known tapestry that looks at this. So in class, we typically look at this. And initially we just kind of identify which side is the Italians, which side is the Ethiopians. Then we look at which side is this tapestry looking to glorify. What is the positive? Who's coming out better looking at this? And this is kind of an interesting picture to explore, because you can see, the numbers, right? The numbers look relatively even, maybe a little bit more on the Ethiopian side, but very well organized, right? Very well organized. Apparently have better tactics regarding the terrain that the battle is going to be waged on. You can see in the back here, I believe is Menelik II, right, watching over. And what obviously comes up is this. Who is this? What is this? And so what we have here is, if you notice, obviously you see the Ethiopian tricolors, nationalistic colors around here, right? And so what is this? Most students are pretty quick to identify, and I'm assuming you identified this halo, right? This kind of iconic or iconography, very, very common within Christian paintings. That you're going to see this halo representing a saint, right? So this is Saint George, the patron saint of Ethiopia, right? So which side is being blessed by God? The Ethiopian side is. And this is an interesting piece as well, because they're both Christian. Here we have Roman Catholic on one side, and you have Coptic Christianity, for the Ethiopians. Ethiopia was not always a Coptic Christian country, but it converts over, or largely becomes Coptic in the 1200s. That you see that become the dominant strain. Coptic Christianity, if you remember, is kind of the dominant form of Christianity for Christians, the Christian minority who lives in Egypt, and will live in Egypt up until you'll have a sizable minority in Egypt, around 10% or so. Going into the 21st century. But the events of 2011 is going to result in a pretty large migration of Coptics out of Egypt. All right. So this is kind of an interesting painting to source and kind of look at. All right. For those of you guys who have topics, for the most part, we're covering most of these. So I just want to throw, you're welcome to read through this. But for those of you who are doing the Zulu as your topic, keep in mind there are three distinct groups that are part of this here. Of course, your Dutch, and sometimes you'll see the word Boer being used to represent the Dutch. So that's B-O-E-R, Boer. All right, so you have the Dutch, who initially set up a settler colony in South Africa in the 1600s, and once the British begin to take over South Africa, the Boers are going to be pushed into the interior, and you're going to see them then coming into contact with the Zulu lands, which will then organize into a kingdom. All right, and so really you've got three sides going on here, in which the British will pacify the other two. They will pacify the Zulu, and then eventually you're going to see what's called the Boer War. At the turn of the 1900s, a real bloody war, in which the British will successfully pacify the Dutch population in South Africa. Herero, so this is another example of a resistance movement that begins and has kind of horrific consequences as a result. And this is, when you look at this, this is the attempt of a settler colony by the Germans in what is today Namibia, and down in Southwest Africa. And you are going to see the Herero push back against those settler colonies. So there will be, massacres of German settlers, men, women, and children. And then more than 100 German civilians are going to be killed. And then you have a response by the German military that is nothing short of, as Strayer puts it in the beginning of this chapter that we were assigned, or that you guys were assigned. This is nothing short of the first example of a genocide of the 20th century. So we're gonna see a massacring of the Herero people by the German military, and then they will be pushed into the Kalahari. And then once they get into the Kalahari, the Germans will then cement the wells so that as they kind of retreat back from the Kalahari, there's nothing left. In this kind of very famous quote that comes out, it's any Herero with or without a rifle, with or without a cattle, right? The German military was ordered to shoot upon them. We do see around 90% of the population of the Herero are decimated in this. So you do have a 10% survival rate by the Herero after this event. I did come across once a pretty interesting little, kind of modern look at this, or looking at some of the effects of this on the Herero culture. And it's a pretty short little video. It's a 2-minute video looking at Namibia and what happens as a result. And I want to watch just a minute of this, and you're welcome to kind of look at this on your own. It's entitled "At a Herero Wedding in Namibia: A Century-Old Tradition on Show." So we'll watch just a little bit of this. Oops, restart this thing.
Layers of petticoats, puffed up sleeves, an embroidered blouse, and a hat meant to look like horns. Felicity is donning the distinctive traditional Herero dress. She's attending a wedding in Sokoto, a village in Namibia, and all the women are wearing these heavy outfits.
To show that you are a little woman, you have to wait. It's a must to us, especially if you are married. Those half naked is not allowed. Every time, whether there is a wedding or whether there is an occasion or whether there is something, you have to wait.
The patterns and types of cloth have evolved, but Herero women have been wearing the same style of dress for a century. It appeared after the German colonialists quashed a rebellion, killing more than 90% of the Herero population before the First World War. The survivors imitated their Victorian style, but with a few tweaks, like the hat, a symbol of the Herero's most precious asset, their cattle.
So this is an interesting example of syncretism. So we see following the genocide of the Herero people, the survivors will adopt German dress, German cultural dress, which is Victorian, right? Kind of Victorian dress styles. But you are going to see a little syncretism with the hat. To symbolize the sacred cow, right, and the bulls. And this is an interesting look here. What this guy's about to explain. So he's an anthropologist, and he'll kind of go through some of the the behavioral thoughts behind why the Herero people the surviving Herero 10% adopt this cultural practice.
It's a response to saying, like any people who have been subject to severe genocide, attempt to exterminate them, they pull into a very defensive and very proud and very specific cultural mode, and they'll still practice that wherever they go. So even if they're in Botswana, they're still wearing the full Herero dress.
The older women wear the dress all the time, even in the city while working.
All right, so it's a pretty interesting piece. All right, so one of the other things that comes out of this, and we'll kind of talk about this in a later time when we start looking at topics like eugenics, but this does apply to one of the topics that you did read about in your Strayer, this notion of scientific racism as being one of the justifications. You are going to see as many as 3,000 Herero skulls are going to be sent back to Berlin, in order to kind of apply this concept of scientific racism. Right, so when you see images like this, right, phrenology, and this is not just a German thing either. The United States was also, England was very active in this field of science at the universities. Okay, and here's a depiction of of the events. Okay. All right. What else? All right. So I'm going to skip over some of this stuff and just look at this. So this is, when you talk about the Xhosa cattle killings, this is an example of, of religious beliefs being applied. Specifically, this is something known as millenarianism, and I will spell that for you. That's millenarian, millenarian, and millenarianism, just an ISM on the back side of this. So this begins with, this begins in the 1850s with a 14-year-old girl, and this is in response to Dutch and British incursions into Xhosa lands, right? And so there's a vision she has, right? And the belief is that if you kill the cattle, right, which is very sacred and very the fundamental part of the Xhosa's economy, right? If you kill all the cattle, then God would come in. This is a Christian concept here. God will come in and sweep the Europeans into the sea. And this will be attempted, right? So, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 cattle are going to be slaughtered, are going to be killed, as a result of this vision that she had. And the result of this, the effect of this is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 80,000 Xhosa are going to die of starvation. And the entire foundation of their economy was also destroyed as this, which means their society is going to be weakened, and you're eventually going to see the Xhosa people put onto a reservation, and eventually being put into just put into labor camps, right, on those reservations. So and here we have a tapestry that is depicting the Xhosa cattle killing. All right, and this is similar to what we see in the United States with the ghost dance. Once again, this is another example of a millenarian activity. All right, so you feel free to go ahead and pause and read through this, and then I'll go to the next slide. Okay. All right, so both movements, right, begin as colonized groups, begin to, groups where we're robbed of traditional resources, right? And what we're seeing here with both of these groups, is a way to try to cope with the situation, that there really was no traditional way of dealing with. Okay, and both of these are also going to result in loss of land and loss of ability to be self-sufficient, right? As in the case of the British or the Americans, depending upon which one you're talking about, take over their lands. All right. And those are on the wrong one. All right, a couple of other real quick ones. When the British take over Egypt in 1882, if you remember back to when Muhammad Ali had taken over Egypt, in the early 1820s, he will then go and move his army to the south and take over the Sudan. When the British take over Egypt in 1882, they also accumulate the Sudan, right? So and you're going to see resistance, right? Or maybe this is opportunism, taking place immediately after or at that time, and this thing culminates in a very famous battle. Where you have a pretty large movement, about 40,000 Sudanese will attack this relatively small British contingent, British Egyptian contingent, so 4 steamboats plus 4 additional. And this is Horatio Kitchener, right? One of his more well-known battles, right? So 20 machine guns, 4 artillery pieces is what they are equipped with. And over the course of a couple of hours, you're going to see 11,000 Sudanese killed, by these modern implements of war, versus 48 British, right, dead. And Winston Churchill, you're probably familiar with him, very famous Secretary of the Navy during World War I in England, and eventually becomes the Prime Minister of England during the Second World War. You're going to see kind of a very well-known quote from him here. And so he was there witnessing, right, this incident. Okay, so all right, so just a couple images. We may or may not kind of talk about these in class. All right. All right. So once again, these are our kind of basic categories of analysis that we, that we're working with today. In addition to, the government-initiated modernization of the military in Ethiopia. All right. Tomorrow we're going to look at the Raj, and or at least what leads to the establishment of the Raj. Okay. All right. So some key takeaways here. Right, so some Africans create new states, some Africans lead rebellions, right, and through direct resistance, right, and some are influenced by religious ideas, right, and this can be applied not just to Africa. These can be applied around the world wherever you see imperialism. All right, that is all for today. In class we're working on our project, so I'm giving students about 15 or so minutes to work on that as well. To get started and make sure you're shoring up your topics. All right, so that's all for today. Sapriati.